October 14th, 2003, Harlan County, Kentucky. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying autumn leaves, a crisp chill biting deep into exposed skin. Sheriff Mark "Mac" McMillan, his breath pluming in stark white clouds against the encroaching dusk, paused. From somewhere far off, a mournful banjo tune drifted, a sound steeped in the very soul of these Appalachian hollows, speaking of forgotten times and quiet sorrows. Abruptly, the melody was brutally cut short by the harsh static and crackle of his two-way radio, a jarring intrusion that yanked him back to the immediate, unsettling present. He was responding to a welfare check, a tip from a shaken hunter who'd stumbled upon something not right deep in the untrodden reaches of Black Mountain. McMillan's grip tightened on his heavy-duty flashlight, the cold metal, a familiar comfort against the rising unease. He pushed deeper, each heavy boot sinking into the muddy, untrodden path. Thorny brush clawed at his uniform, snagging at the tough fabric, but McMillan barely registered it. His focus narrowed. His powerful flashlight beam became his entire world, a solitary tunnel of light cutting through the oppressive gloom, dancing across gnarled tree trunks and the occasional, unsettling glimmer of rusted tin, relics of some long-abandoned endeavor. The silence, once the banjo faded, was profound, broken only by his own labored breathing and the squelch of his boots. This wasn't just a remote part of the county. This was a place time had forgotten, a hollow that had swallowed its own history. Every step felt like an intrusion, a trespass into a domain fiercely guarding its secrets, the air growing heavier with an unspoken warning. Then, a flicker, a subtle shift in the shadows ahead, just beyond a dense cluster of ancient oaks. McMillan froze, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He adjusted his beam, and there it was, a crude, makeshift dwelling, barely discernible from the surrounding undergrowth. It was little more than a haphazard pile of salvaged wood and tarps, yet a thin wisp of smoke curled lazily from a pipe chimney, betraying a presence. A faint, almost animalistic whimper, raw with pain or fear, echoed from within the flimsy structure. McMillan instinctively raised his hand to his radio, then hesitated, a primal unease washing over him, colder than the autumn air. He took a deep, metallic-tasting breath, the tang of fear mixing with the damp earth, and pushed forward. What unspeakable truth lay hidden, untouched by time, in this forgotten corner of Kentucky, shielded from the modern world? McMillan pushed aside the makeshift tarp acting as a door, the air inside immediately thick, with the acrid scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like decay. His powerful flashlight beam cut through the oppressive gloom, revealing a single, dirt-floored room furnished with crude, salvaged planks and threadbare blankets. In a shadowed corner, huddled beneath a pile of rags, a young boy, no older than 8, stared back with wide, terrified eyes. His small frame was racked by a deep, guttural cough, and his face, even in the dim light, was strikingly disfigured, a severe cleft running from his upper lip to his nostril. The dwelling was squalid, utterly devoid of modern amenities, a stark testament to desperate, isolated survival. McMillan's gut twisted. This wasn't just poverty. It was a profound, unsettling neglect, untouched by time. The sheer, raw vulnerability of the child struck him deep. McMillan immediately reached for his two-way radio, the discovery confirming his worst fears. "Dispatch, this is McMillan. I've located the dwelling. Requesting immediate backup, Kentucky State Police and Child Protective Services. We have a serious situation here, multiple minors, severe neglect." As he spoke, shadows stirred outside. From the surrounding woods, several gaunt figures emerged, silent and watchful, their faces mirroring the boy's deformities. Leading them was an old woman, her eyes burning with a fierce, possessive intensity, Granny Maeve Thorne. "You ain't welcome here, lawman. Her voice, raspy and edged with ancient distrust, cut through the quiet. "This ain't your business. Leave us be." Their appearance was a direct challenge to his authority, a stark display of their deep-seated animosity towards outsiders. The standoff stretched into the encroaching night, a tense silence punctuated by the chirping of crickets and rustling leaves. Eventually, Kentucky State Police cruisers, followed by Child Protective Services vehicles, cut through the gloom. The sheer weight of uniformed presence, however unwelcome, finally prompted Granny Maeve and the other adults to retreat deeper into the shadows, their eyes burning with defiance and deep mistrust. Paramedics moved in cautiously, their initial assessments of the children revealing a heartbreaking litany: severe malnutrition, untreated infections, and profound developmental delays. The squalid conditions and the children's physical state shocked even seasoned responders. It became clear this wasn't a simple welfare check. It was a complex humanitarian crisis, demanding specialized medical and ethical intervention. The state would need more than just social workers to unravel this profound tragedy. With the immediate crisis somewhat contained, Sheriff McMillan and Dr. Lena Sharma, a brilliant geneticist from the University of Kentucky called in by the state, began the daunting task of piecing together the Thorne family's history. They scoured dusty Harlan County records, old census data, and state archives, hunting for any mention of a family line that seemed to vanish from official documentation generations ago. Local folklore, whispered among the oldest residents, provided chilling, albeit fragmented, clues. Tales of the hollow folk, or cursed blood, echoed through the county's oral history, suggesting a long-standing, deliberate isolation. Each fragmented record, every hushed anecdote, painted a disturbing picture of a family deliberately cut off, their existence a ghost in the modern world, their conditions a mystery rooted deep in Appalachian soil. With the immediate crisis somewhat contained, Sheriff McMillan and Dr. Lena Sharma, a brilliant geneticist from the University of Kentucky called in by the state, began the daunting task of piecing together the Thorne family's history. They scoured dusty Harlan County records, old census data, and state archives, hunting for any mention of a family line that seemed to vanish from official documentation generations ago. Local folklore, whispered among the oldest residents, provided chilling, albeit fragmented, clues. Tales of the hollow folk, or cursed blood, echoed through the county's oral history, suggesting a long-standing, deliberate isolation. Each fragmented record, every hushed anecdote, painted a disturbing picture of a family deliberately cut off, their existence a ghost in the modern world, their conditions a mystery rooted deep in Appalachian soil. The Kentucky State Police, now leading the broader investigation, immediately expanded the search beyond local archives. FBI resources were consulted, particularly their specialized unit for missing persons and child welfare cases, given the extreme isolation and the children's condition. The initial forensic sweep of the crude Thorne dwelling was meticulous, with KSP technicians carefully documenting every aspect of their primitive existence. Every rusted tool, every threadbare blanket, every handmade item was cataloged, not just as evidence of neglect, but as potential artifacts hinting at a life utterly detached from modern society. The air around the dwelling, still heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, now carried the sterile tang of forensic chemicals, a stark contrast to the ancient secrets it held. Public records, usually a reliable starting point, proved largely unhelpful. Harlan County's historical records, often incomplete for the most remote hollows, contained only sporadic mentions of a Thorne family in the late 19th century, fading into obscurity by the early 1900s. National databases, encompassing everything from birth certificates to social security numbers, yielded no matches for any of the adult Thornes or children. It was as if an entire family line had simply ceased to exist on paper, a profound void in the digital age. This complete absence of official documentation painted a stark picture of generations-long self-sufficiency, a ghost family existing outside the very fabric of American bureaucracy and civic life. Dr. Sharma, working closely with KSP Forensics, focused on the medical data, Samples taken from the children, particularly the boy first discovered by Macmillan, began to confirm her initial suspicions. The distinct facial deformities, coupled with other physical anomalies like polydactyly and severe dental issues, pointed strongly towards multiple recessive genetic disorders. This wasn't just random bad luck. It was a clear pattern consistent with generations of extreme consanguinity or inbreeding within an isolated population. The raw data from the initial medical assessments, now compiled into detailed reports, presented an undeniable case of profound medical neglect and a tragic generational genetic legacy. Initial attempts by social workers and KSP investigators to conduct formal interviews with Granny Maeve and the other adult Thorns proved exceptionally difficult. Their dialect, a unique blend of archaic mountain speech and idiosyncratic phrases, often made direct communication challenging. More significantly, their deep-seated mistrust of outsiders, honed over generations, was an almost impenetrable barrier. Granny Maeve, her eyes burning with an almost religious fervor, insisted their conditions were a, quote, curse inherited from the land itself, a punishment for forgotten transgressions. She vehemently refused to discuss their lineage or any details of their history, repeating her demand that they be left alone. Her defiance rooted in a profound, almost primal fear of the outside world. KSP and CPS moved swiftly to petition the Harlan County Circuit Court for an emergency order, seeking both temporary custody of the minor Thorn children and authorization for immediate, comprehensive medical evaluations. However, their initial efforts were met with a significant legal hurdle. Judge Eleanor Vance, a respected but cautious jurist with deep roots in the community, expressed profound reservations. She acknowledged the horrific living conditions and the children's evident neglect, but hesitated to authorize such a sweeping intervention without clearer, more immediate evidence of life-threatening harm beyond the chronic issues. The legal team argued vociferously for the state's paramount duty to protect children, but Judge Vance remained unconvinced that a blanket removal, given the family's unique circumstances and deeply ingrained isolation, was legally justifiable at that precise moment. This delay was a bitter pill for Macmillan and Dr. Sharma, who saw the children's window of opportunity narrowing. Judge Vance's reluctance stemmed from the unprecedented nature of the case and the thorny legal precedents it could set. While the Thorn adults had no formal legal representation, Granny Maeve's fierce, albeit fragmented, testimony to the court clerk painted a picture of deep-seated cultural beliefs and an almost religious adherence to their isolated way of life. The judge worried about accusations of cultural insensitivity or overreach, particularly given the family's profound distrust of outsiders. She demanded more compelling evidence of acute, rather than chronic, danger, pushing the state to prove that intervention was not just desirable, but absolutely necessary and imminent to prevent a specific, immediate tragedy. This bureaucratic resistance, rooted in legal caution, felt like an insurmountable wall against the urgent needs of the children. Sheriff Macmillan and Dr. Sharma found themselves locked in a frustrating legal limbo. Dr. Sharma had meticulously compiled her genetic reports, unequivocally confirming the devastating health consequences of generations of inbreeding, but the scientific evidence alone wasn't enough to sway the court for an immediate, forced intervention. Macmillan, witnessing the children's continued decline during follow-up visits, felt the weight of their suffering pressing down on him. The legal system, designed to protect individual rights, was, in this unique instance, inadvertently prolonging the very neglect it sought to prevent. The clock was ticking, particularly for little Silas, whose persistent cough and increasing lethargy became a silent, agonizing countdown. Sheriff Macmillan and Dr. Sharma, frustrated by the judicial delay, knew they needed more than just chronic neglect. They needed undeniable proof of acute, imminent danger, a smoking gun that even Judge Vance couldn't ignore. Dr. Sharma, leveraging her university connections, secured funding for advanced genetic sequencing. She brought in a specialized team, including a forensic anthropologist and an environmental geneticist, whose expertise extended beyond DNA to the very landscape. Their mission, to map the Thorn family's genetic lineage with unprecedented precision and to understand how their specific environment on Black Mountain might have contributed to their conditions, or even offered clues to their ancient isolation. This was no longer just a welfare check. It was an urgent, scientific and humanitarian expedition into the heart of a forgotten world. The KSP, now fully invested, expanded its forensic sweep. While initial efforts focused on the dwelling, the new directive was to examine the entire hollow. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed, slowly mapping the subsurface for anomalies. What they found was chilling. Beneath layers of leaf litter and damp soil, faint outlines of what appeared to be older, shallower burial sites, predating any official cemetery records. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, meticulously documented the findings, suggesting an unbroken, generational presence on this precise patch of land. Concurrently, Dr. Sharma's team identified specific, rare genetic markers in the children's DNA, unique even within the broader Appalachian genetic pool, a signature of generations of isolation and extreme consanguinity, solidifying the scientific explanation for the curse. These new findings began to weave a terrifyingly coherent narrative. The genetic markers, combined with the discovery of the ancient burial sites, provided a scientific bridge to the whispered folklore of the Hollow Folk and cursed blood. The land itself, once seen as the source of Granny Maeve's curse, was now understood as the physical incubator of their profound isolation, trapping a specific genetic lineage within its rugged embrace for centuries. The specific mutations identified were not just random. They pointed to a common ancestor, perhaps hundreds of years prior, whose recessive traits had been amplified through generations of intermarriage. This wasn't merely neglect. It was a living, tragic testament to human evolution gone awry in isolation. A medical time capsule discovered in the modern age. Macmillan, accompanied by KSP environmental specialists, conducted a more extensive yet respectful survey of the surrounding wilderness. They uncovered hidden, rudimentary game traps, almost camouflaged against the forest floor, and ancient, barely discernible paths leading to spring-fed water sources and secluded clearings. These subtle markers spoke volumes of the Thorns, deep, almost primal knowledge of their land, their self-sufficient existence, a stark contrast to the modern world just miles away. This profound ancestral connection to the Hollow made it clear that their way of life was not a recent choice, but a deeply ingrained inheritance. However, attempts to present this comprehensive evidence to Granny Maeve were met with her unwavering, almost spiritual defiance, her eyes burning with an ancient, unyielding distrust. The weight of this new, irrefutable evidence finally began to turn the tide with Judge Vance. Dr. Sharma's updated genetic reports, now detailing specific, treatable conditions that were deteriorating rapidly due to neglect, were presented as undeniable proof of acute harm. Macmillan's testimony, bolstered by KSP's environmental and forensic findings, painted a comprehensive picture of immediate, preventable suffering. Little Silas's persistent, now worsening, respiratory crisis became the critical, acute evidence Judge Vance had demanded. The legal hurdle, once an insurmountable wall, was finally clearing, but the agonizing countdown for Silas and the other children continued, now with a desperate, renewed urgency. The KSP's deep dive into Harlan County's archives, combined with Dr. Sharma's genealogical mapping, began to uncover more than just an absence of records. Their initial frustration with the sparse data turned into suspicion as they cross-referenced property deeds and tax rolls. The Thorn Hollow, though clearly inhabited for generations, showed no official land ownership, no tax payments, no modern utilities. It was a complete blank space on paper, a legal anomaly that defied logic in the 21st century. This wasn't merely neglect. It hinted at a deliberate erasure, a meticulous effort to keep an entire family off the grid, beyond the reach of the law and modern society. The sheer scale of this administrative vacuum was unprecedented, suggesting a deeper, more unsettling secret. The breakthrough came from a retired county clerk, Martha Jenkins, a woman known for her meticulous, almost obsessive, record-keeping. Disturbed by the news of the Thorn children, she quietly contacted Macmillan, revealing a hidden ledger she'd kept for decades, separate from official county documents. This ledger detailed a clandestine agreement from the early 1900s. A powerful local lumber baron, Silas Thorne Sr., the patriarch of a now prominent Harlan family, had secretly orchestrated the disappearance of his impoverished, disfigured cousins from all public records. His motive was clear: to protect his family's burgeoning reputation and wealth from the perceived shame of their cursed relatives. This wasn't just isolation. It was a deliberate, intergenerational cover-up, a chilling act of internal betrayal that had condemned an entire lineage to oblivion. The revelation hit Macmillan like a physical blow. The Silas Thorne Sr. mentioned in the ledger was the great-grandfather of Judge Vance, the very judge who had initially hesitated to grant the intervention order. The profound implications were immediate and far-reaching. The isolation of the Thorne clan wasn't just a consequence of their chosen reclusion, but a direct result of a calculated, generations-old conspiracy orchestrated by one of Harlan's most influential families. This discovery shattered the narrative of simple neglect, transforming the case into a sprawling saga of historical injustice, social engineering, and the deep-seated power dynamics that had shaped the county for over a century. The investigation had suddenly taken a dark, personal turn, implicating the very foundations of local authority. The bombshell revelation regarding Silas Thorne Sr. and his deliberate erasure of his cousins from public record did not remain a secret for long. A leak, likely from within the KSP or a disgruntled court staffer, sent shockwaves through Harlan County and beyond. Local news affiliates, then major national outlets, descended upon the quiet Appalachian community, their cameras and microphones amplifying the story of generational injustice. Headlines screamed about Harlan's hidden shame and the judge's dark family secret. The carefully constructed facade of the Thorne family's chosen isolation crumbled under the intense scrutiny, replaced by a narrative of systemic oppression and a chilling betrayal by the very institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. The story quickly became a national symbol of how power could silence and marginalize. The public reaction was swift and furious. Outraged citizens, some traveling from neighboring states, converged on the Harlan County Courthouse. Protests erupted, demanding immediate action for the Thorne children and accountability for everyone involved in the historical cover-up. Signs reading, "Justice for the Hollow Folk" and "No More Hidden Shame" dotted the crowd, reflecting a collective anger that transcended the local community. Civil rights advocates and child welfare organizations issued scathing condemnations, turning the isolated tragedy into a national conversation about the ethics of state intervention, rural poverty, and the enduring legacy of systemic disenfranchisement in forgotten American corners. The pressure mounted daily, transforming a quiet legal battle into a public spectacle. Judge Vance, once a respected figure, found herself at the epicenter of the escalating controversy. Her chambers were deluged with calls and faxes demanding her immediate recusal. Editorials in prominent newspapers questioned her impartiality, highlighting the undeniable conflict of interest given her great-grandfather's role in the Thorne family's forced isolation. Though she maintained her commitment to justice, the weight of her family's past became an unbearable burden, threatening to derail the entire legal process. The ethical quandary was stark. Could a judge, whose own lineage was intertwined with the very injustice being uncovered, fairly preside over the fate of the Thorne children? The answer, for many, was a resounding no. Amidst the media circus and public outcry, the dire medical situation of the Thorne children remained paramount. Little Silas, his breathing increasingly shallow, was rushed to a specialized pediatric unit in Lexington. Dr. Sharma worked tirelessly, leveraging the newfound public attention to secure the best possible care for him and the other children now in protective custody. The legal team, now emboldened by the public's support and Judge Vance's inevitable recusal, pushed for an emergency hearing. The stakes were higher than ever. The state had to act decisively, not just to save the children, but to redeem itself in the eyes of a nation watching closely. The clock ticked loudly, not just for Silas, but for the very soul of Harlan County. The agonizing countdown for little Silas reached its breaking point in the dead of night. His frail body, already ravaged by malnutrition and untreated infection, succumbed to a severe respiratory crisis, his shallow breaths rattling in the confined space. Dr. Sharma, having anticipated this devastating turn, had already secured a rapid response medical team who now worked frantically within the squalid dwelling. The sterile efficiency of the paramedics, their oxygen masks and IV bags, clashed violently with the primitive surroundings, creating an almost surreal scene. Granny Maeve, her eyes burning with an ancient, almost religious fervor, watched their every move from the doorway. She saw not aid, but a further violation, a modern poison threatening to consume her cursed grandchild. Macmillan, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach, braced himself for the confrontation he knew was imminent, the air thick with desperation and volatile suspicion. As the paramedics meticulously prepared little Silas for immediate air transport, their every movement precise and urgent, Granny Maeve erupted. A guttural shriek tore from her throat, raw with primal fear and generations of ingrained mistrust. "You ain't taking him. You'll poison him. Leave him be," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. With surprising speed, she snatched a rusted, heavy hatchet from beneath a pile of rags. She wielded it, not as a weapon of malice, but as a desperate shield, her eyes wide, with a terrifying blend of terror and fervent conviction, blocking their exit. Her ancient imprecations, a chaotic mix of archaic mountain dialect and raw grief, filled the hollow, challenging the very notion of outside help. The medical team froze, their mission of rescue abruptly transformed into a perilous standoff against a matriarch consumed by a distorted yet profound love. Sheriff Macmillan, his heart heavy but his resolve unyielding, moved decisively. He lunged, not to harm, but to disarm, wresting the hatchet from Granny Maeve's surprisingly strong grip. It was a heartbreaking struggle, a clash of duties and deeply held beliefs, as she fought with the ferocity of a trapped animal, screaming that they were stealing her family, her cursed blood, condemning them to an unknown fate. As Macmillan finally subdued and held her, gently but firmly, he looked into her eyes and saw not malice, but a profound, ancient terror, a desperate love warped by generations of isolation and ignorance. Little Silas, barely clinging to life, was rushed out of the dwelling, his tiny form disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom as the helicopter blades began to churn. The rest of the Thorn clan watched in stunned, silent horror, their isolated world irrevocably shattered, their future now inextricably bound to the outside world they so desperately feared. Little Silas, against all odds, survived the ordeal, clinging to life long enough for the advanced medical care to take hold. He, along with the other Thorn children, was permanently removed from their parents, custody by order of the Harlan County Circuit Court. Placed in specialized foster care and rehabilitation programs, these children began a long, arduous journey of physical and emotional recovery, learning to navigate a world they never knew existed. Granny Maeve and the adult Thorns, though not charged with criminal neglect given the unique circumstances and their profound ignorance of modern standards, were offered extensive social services and medical care. They largely refused, however, choosing instead to retreat deeper into the remaining pockets of the wilderness, their ancient family unit irrevocably shattered by the intervention of the outside world, yet fiercely clinging to their isolation. The story, once leaked to the press, exploded into a national media frenzy, igniting a fierce public debate across the United States. Headlines blared about Harlan's hidden shame and the profound tragedy of the Thorn children, forcing a spotlight onto issues of rural poverty, the limits of state intervention, genetic privacy, and society's responsibility to its most isolated citizens. Academics, ethicists, and politicians from Washington, D.C. to university campuses weighed in, dissecting the complex intersection of history, culture, and public health in forgotten American corners. Harlan County, once a quiet Appalachian community, found itself grappling with an uncomfortable national scrutiny, its hidden past brought violently into the modern age, forcing a collective reckoning with the uncomfortable truths of its own history and identity. Sheriff McMillan, profoundly shaken by the raw humanity and tragic choices he witnessed, became a quiet but persistent advocate for better rural social services and outreach programs in Appalachia. Dr. Sharma, for her part, dedicated her career to researching and assisting isolated communities with genetic predispositions, using the Thorne case as a powerful, haunting example of the critical need for proactive outreach and compassionate education. The ancient curse Granny Maeve spoke of was definitively reframed, not as a supernatural affliction, but as a preventable genetic tragedy, a devastating consequence of isolation and generational neglect that had finally been brought into the light. The Thorne children's future, though uncertain, now held the promise of a life beyond the hollow, a chance at health and belonging. If this harrowing journey into Harlan County's deepest secrets resonated with you, and you believe in shedding light on forgotten stories, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more investigative content, and watch our next deep dive into the hidden histories of America.